The wind cut like a blade, tearing through Hannah Carter's threadbare dress as she staggered down the frozen dirt road, her children clutching either side of her skirt. Eli, her 8-year-old, tried to be strong, his small jaw clenched, but his trembling fingers betrayed him. Clara, just 7, had long since stopped crying. Her tiny face, framed by golden curls, was ghostly pale. The girl's lips, once soft and pink, were now cracked and blue. Behind them, the dark silhouette of the farmhouse loomed, the place she had called home since her marriage to William. Now it was nothing but a tomb filled with the cold, sneering faces of her husband's kin, people who had once embraced her, once claimed to be her family. The moment William had drawn his last breath, they had turned, their pity souring into contempt. She had no claim to their roof, they said, no claim to the food or the warmth of their fire. A widow was nothing but a burden, and 2 starving mouths only made it worse. The barn door slammed behind them, the echo ringing through the barren landscape. Snow churned beneath their feet as Hannah trudged forward, her boots barely holding together. She didn't know where they were going. She only knew they had to keep moving. The sky was a bruised shade of gray, heavy with the promise of another storm. Trees lined the narrow path ahead, their skeletal branches swaying like the fingers of some unseen specter. Hannah clutched Clara to her chest as the wind howled. Every step forward felt like a battle against the earth itself, as if the land had conspired with her in-laws to swallow her whole. Eli walked beside her in silence. His cheeks were raw from the wind, his knuckles red from clenching them so tightly. He had not spoken since they were cast out, not even when his aunt had torn the blanket from his shoulders before slamming the door in his face. "I can carry her," Eli said suddenly, his voice hoarse. "You're tired." Hannah's heart clenched. He was only a boy, a child who should have been playing near the hearth, not offering to carry his sister through a wilderness that wanted them dead. She gave him a weak smile, shaking her head. "I'm all right, love. Just keep close." The road twisted, disappearing into the trees. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became. Only the crunch of ice beneath their feet and the rasp of their breath remained. By midday, their bodies ached, their stomachs churned with hunger. Hannah tried to focus on anything other than the gnawing emptiness clawing at her insides. But it was relentless. The last meal they had eaten was 2 days ago, a crust of bread given to them out of pity before the door had slammed shut. Clara whimpered. Hannah pressed her lips to the child's forehead. "Too cold, too weak. Not much farther," she whispered, though she had no idea if that was true. Eli tripped, catching himself before he hit the ground. He gritted his teeth, swiping at his face in frustration. Hannah swallowed the lump in her throat. "We'll stop soon. Find some shelter." But where? The land stretched endlessly before them, blanketed in white. The trees, though tall, offered no refuge against the cold that gnawed at their bones. A crow cawed in the distance. Eli tugged on her sleeve. "There." She followed his gaze. A small structure stood just beyond the ridge, half hidden by the trees. A trading post. Hope flared in her chest. With renewed urgency, they stumbled toward the abandoned building. The wood was warped from age, the door barely clinging to its rusted hinges. Hannah braced herself, then shoved against it with her shoulder. It groaned in protest before giving way. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and decay. Shelves lined the walls, mostly bare, though a few broken crates lay scattered across the floor. A fireplace stood in the corner, long dead but still intact. She set Clara down gently, wrapping what little fabric she had around the girl. Eli was already rummaging through the debris. "Anything?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not much," he admitted, holding up a cracked bottle. "Some dried-up beans. Nothing fresh." Hannah nodded. It would have to do. She turned her attention to the fireplace. If she could get a fire going, they might survive the night. She reached for the flint she had taken from the farmhouse, her hands stiff from the cold. The first strike sparked, but the kindling was damp. She tried again, and again. A spark caught. A small ember flickered, then died. Desperation gnawed at her. She struck the flint again, harder this time. The ember grew. Smoke curled upward. a flame. She exhaled shakily, shielding the fragile fire with her hands as it licked at the wood. Slowly, warmth began to seep into the space. Clara stirred, pressing closer to the flickering light. Eli sat beside her, pulling his knees to his chest. For the first time in hours, Hannah allowed herself to breathe. Outside, the wind howled. The walls creaked under its weight. Something moved in the darkness. Hannah froze. A low growl. Her pulse thundered. Eli stiffened beside her. The growl came again, closer this time. She reached for the rusted knife she had found earlier, gripping it tightly. Her body screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. Nowhere safe. The door, still partially ajar, shuddered against the wind. A shadow passed by the opening. Not human. A wolf. Hannah pressed a hand over Clara's mouth as she stirred. Eli's breath was shallow, his wide eyes locked on the doorway. The wolf sniffed the air. Another gust of wind rattled the building, and the creature stepped forward. Hannah's grip tightened on the knife. If it came closer, if it lunged, she would fight. The wolf let out a low, rumbling snarl, eyes gleaming in the firelight. Its fur was thick, dusted with frost. It took another step. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it turned and slunk back into the night. Silence. Hannah exhaled shakily, her hands trembling. Eli swallowed hard. "Do you think it'll come back?" "I don't know," she admitted. They didn't sleep that night. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The wind never stopped, and Hannah knew, deep in her bones, that this was only the beginning. Dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in muted golds and purples. As she stared at the rising sun, exhaustion pressing heavy on her shoulders, a shadow fell across the doorway. Tall, silent, a figure stood there, watching them. Her breath caught. Not a wolf, not a bandit. Something else. The stranger did not move, did not speak. But Hannah knew, without a doubt, everything was about to change. The man stood motionless in the doorway, his face shadowed beneath the low morning light. Hannah tensed, her heart hammering against her ribs as she clutched Clara tighter. Eli pressed against her side, his breath shallow, his fingers curling into the fabric of her dress. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his form wrapped in thick furs that carried the scent of earth and smoke. His long, dark hair was braided, resting against his chest, and his eyes, sharp, unyielding, studied them with quiet intensity. A bow was slung over his back, a knife strapped to his hip. He did not speak. Hannah's grip on the rusted knife tightened, though she knew it was a feeble defense against a man like this. The fire had burned low, flickering weakly between them, casting shadows that danced across his expressionless face. He could kill them if he wanted to. There would be no struggle worth mentioning, no chance to run. The silence stretched. Then, slowly, he reached into the folds of his furs and pulled something free. A small bundle. He took one step forward, placed it on the ground, and stepped back. Hannah hesitated, her body coiled with tension. The bundle lay there between them, wrapped in rough cloth. Eli shifted, his voice barely above a whisper. "What is it?" She didn't answer. She forced herself to move, inching forward, never taking her eyes off the man. Her fingers trembled as she reached out, peeling the cloth back. Dried meat, a flask of water, a gift. She swallowed hard, lifting her gaze. He was still watching, unmoving, unreadable. She expected a demand, some price to be named, a trade, an order, a warning. None came. She did not trust kindness. She had learned that kindness always came with a cost, that it was something people wielded like a tool, like a weapon, only to snatch it back when it suited them. But there was no cruelty in his gaze, no amusement, no malice, only quiet expectation. She exhaled slowly. "Thank you." He gave no sign that he had heard her. Instead, he turned, stepping back toward the door, as if satisfied with whatever unspoken decision had passed between them. "Wait," she blurted, surprising even herself. He paused, glancing back over his shoulder. Hannah hesitated. Her throat felt dry. The words lodged there, unwilling to form. She wanted to ask why. Why he had helped her. Why he had left them this offering instead of walking away. Instead, She found herself gripping the food tighter, as if it might disappear the moment he vanished. The man did not press her for words. He only nodded once before slipping back into the morning mist. She did not see him again for 2 days. The food lasted longer than expected, divided carefully between them. Clara grew stronger, her cheeks less hollow. Eli ate quietly, his gaze flicking toward the door every so often, waiting. Hannah told herself not to hope. The second time he appeared, she did not flinch. This time, he entered without hesitation, stepping inside as if he had already decided they were not a threat. The wind howled behind him, carrying the bitter sting of approaching snowfall. Hannah straightened, willing her voice not to waver. "Who are you?" He glanced at her, then at the fire, as if considering whether or not to answer. Finally, his voice broke the silence, rough-edged and low. "Cheyenne." The name hung between them, unfamiliar yet solid. He crouched by the fire, holding his hands to the warmth, his movements slow, deliberate. Eli watched him with wary curiosity, his fingers tightening around his knees. Cheyenne's gaze drifted toward the boy. "You are strong." Eli blinked. The words, though simple, carried weight. Recognition. He sat a little straighter, nodding hesitantly. Hannah frowned. "Why are you helping us?" Cheyenne did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his satchel, pulling free a bundle of animal skins. Without a word, he handed them to her. Hannah hesitated, then took them. They were soft, thick, warm. She swallowed. "You're giving us this? You need it." Simple, certain, no expectation of repayment. She gripped the furs, feeling the heat of them against her frozen fingers. "I don't understand. You don't even know us." Cheyenne's gaze flickered toward the fire. "I know hunger." The words settled heavily between them. She studied him more closely then, the quiet way he held himself, the way he did not waste unnecessary movement, the sharp awareness in his eyes. A man who had seen more than he cared to speak of. Silence fell once more, but it was different now, less suffocating. When Cheyenne finally stood, adjusting the strap of his satchel, Hannah found herself speaking before she could think. "Where are you going?" He met her gaze, his expression as unreadable as ever. "Hunting." She hesitated. "Will you come back?" A beat of quiet passed. Then he nodded once. Eli, for the first time in days, smiled. Cheyenne returned the next evening, carrying the spoils of his hunt, a rabbit, skinned and gutted, its meat fresh. He wordlessly handed it to Hannah, watching as she blinked in stunned silence. That night, they ate well. Days passed. The snowfall thickened, blanketing the land in endless white. Cheyenne did not leave. At first, he came only in the evenings, his presence a quiet force in their makeshift home. But as the winter deepened, as the cold became relentless, he stayed longer. He spoke little, but his actions spoke for him. He showed Eli how to weave traps, how to set them with patience and precision. He brought firewood, stacking it against the far wall. One evening, as Hannah struggled to sew a torn piece of cloth with numb fingers, Cheyenne took the needle from her hands and finished the work himself. She did not know what to make of him. The fear she had clung to, the distrust that had once burned so fiercely in her chest, was fading, replaced by something she could not yet name. Clara had taken to him quickly. She would sit beside him, watching with wide, curious eyes as he sharpened his knife. He let her, never speaking, never pushing her away. Eli followed him with quiet reverence, mimicking his movements, eager to learn. And Hannah, for the first time in what felt like years, was not afraid. The fire crackled between them, casting long shadows on the wooden walls. Cheyenne shifted, glancing at her from across the flames. "Winter will not be kind." She nodded. "It never is." His gaze held hers. "You cannot stay here." She swallowed. "I have nowhere else to go." A pause. "Come with me." The words sent a jolt through her. She stared at him, searching his expression for something, anything, that might hint at deception. But there was nothing, only quiet certainty. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "I know enough." She looked at her children. Clara, curled up against the furs, her breathing soft and even. Eli, sitting beside Chayton, his hands calloused, his eyes older than they should be. A choice. She exhaled slowly, her grip tightening around the fabric in her lap. The wind howled outside. The fire burned low, and Hannah, for the first time since the world had turned against her, felt something stir deep within her chest. Hope. The journey away from the abandoned trading post was slow, each step pressing them deeper into the wilderness, farther from the world they had known. Snow crunched underfoot, the weight of it heavy on Hannah's boots. Eli walked close to Chayton, mirroring his careful movements, while Clara rode against the warrior's back, her small hands clinging to the thick furs draped over his shoulders. Hannah kept her distance. She watched him as they walked, trying to decipher the quiet strength in his stride, the way he barely made a sound despite his size. His presence unsettled her in ways she could not name. He had given her no reason to fear him, and yet fear had been her companion for so long that it refused to release its grip on her so easily. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The trees grew denser, their towering forms blocking out the gray sky. The deeper they went, the more Hannah realized how lost she would have been without Chayton's guidance. There were no roads here, no markers, only endless white and the whispering voice of the forest. By nightfall, they made camp near a rocky overhang, where the wind was less cruel. Chayton worked efficiently, gathering wood, striking flint against steel until embers caught. Hannah pulled the furs tighter around Clara, watching the way Eli leaned in as Chayton showed him how to stack the wood properly, how to feed the fire slowly so it burned steady and strong. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but the words felt foreign on her tongue. Instead, she busied herself with preparing what little food they had. The dried meat he had given them days before was nearly gone, but Chayton had brought fresh game, skinned and cleaned with careful precision. As the scent of roasting meat filled the air, Hannah felt the first pang of something unfamiliar, relief. Clara had warmed up to him faster than Hannah expected. She sat beside him, her small hands playing with the fringe of his coat, tracing the beads sewn into the leather. He let her, unbothered by her quiet curiosity. When she shivered, he wrapped the edge of his cloak around her without a word. Eli was different. He wanted to learn, to prove himself. He studied Chayton's every move, from the way he tied knots to how he cut the meat. He did not ask questions, only observed. Hannah found herself watching too. As night settled in, the firelight cast long shadows against the trees. Chayton sat across from her, sharpening his knife with slow, practiced movements. His expression remained unreadable, but there was a stillness about him, a patience she had never seen in a man before. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. Chayton did not pause in his work. "My winter camp." She swallowed. "How far?" 2 days. The thought of traveling through the snow for 2 more days made her stomach twist, but she forced herself to nod. Clara had already drifted to sleep, curled beneath the blankets, while Eli sat up beside the fire, eyes heavy with exhaustion. Hannah reached out, brushing the hair from his forehead. "Sleep," she murmured. He shook his head stubbornly. "I'm not tired." Chayton glanced at him. "Rest is strength." Eli hesitated before nodding, stretching out beside Clara. Hannah waited until his breathing slowed before allowing herself to exhale. The night was quiet, save for the occasional crackle of the fire and the distant call of an owl. Hannah felt the weight of Chayton's gaze on her, steady and unwavering. "You do not trust me," he said finally. She stiffened. "I don't trust anyone." His eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Wise." She frowned. "Then why help us?" He was silent for a long moment, as if deciding whether or not to answer. Finally, he sheathed his knife and leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "You are alone," he said simply. "I have seen what happens to those left to fend for themselves." She swallowed, her fingers curling into the blanket draped over her lap. "And what do you expect in return?" His expression did not change. Nothing. She wanted to believe him. But life had taught her that men never gave without expecting something in return. They sat in silence, the fire burning between them. The next day, the journey continued, the terrain growing harsher. Hannah's legs ached, her breath forming small clouds in the icy air. Chayton moved ahead of them, clearing the path, his presence a silent promise of safety. They reached a river by midday, its surface half frozen, jagged ice breaking apart where the current ran strong. Chayton studied it for a moment before stepping onto the ice, testing its strength. Hannah's heart pounded. "Is it safe?" He nodded. "Step where I step." She hesitated, then took Eli's hand. The ice creaked beneath them as they moved forward. Clara whimpered, burying her face in Hannah's shoulder. The river below roared, dark and merciless. Hannah forced herself to keep going, following in Chayton's exact footsteps. A crack split the air. Her stomach lurched. Eli gasped as the ice beneath his foot gave way. Hannah lunged, grabbing his arm just as Chayton moved, swift as a striking hawk. His hand clamped around Eli's wrist, pulling him back onto solid ground before the ice could swallow him whole. Eli trembled, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Chayton crouched before him, gripping his shoulders. "Breathe," he said, his voice calm, steady. "You are safe." Eli swallowed hard, nodding. Hannah's hands shook as she pulled him close. She met Chayton's gaze over Eli's head, her chest tight. "Thank you," she whispered. They crossed the rest of the river carefully, reaching the far side without further incident. By the time they arrived at Chayton's winter camp, exhaustion weighed heavy on Hannah's bones. The camp was nestled between towering rock formations, shielded from the wind. A small fire pit sat in the center, surrounded by simple but sturdy shelters made of wood and hide. Chayton moved with quiet efficiency, setting down his pack, checking their surroundings. Eli sat beside the fire, staring into the flames, while Clara curled up beside him, her body finally giving in to fatigue. Hannah hesitated before lowering herself onto the furs Chayton had spread out for them. "You are safe here," he said. She met his gaze, searching for deception and finding none. For the first time in months, she believed it. That night, as the fire burned low and the wind howled beyond the rocky cliffs, Hannah allowed herself to close her eyes. She did not dream of hunger. She did not dream of fear. She dreamed only of warmth. The days passed, each one blending into the next as winter tightened its grip on the land. Chayton's camp became a refuge for Hannah and her children, a place of quiet survival. The nights were long and cold, but they were safe, and that safety, though fragile, was a comfort she had not dared to hope for in the darkest moments. She watched her children grow stronger each day. Eli, though still quiet, was more confident, his curiosity now tempered with a newfound understanding of the world around him. Clara, too, began to laugh again, the sound soft but real. Chayton moved through the days with a quiet presence, as constant as the mountains surrounding them. He hunted when food ran low, building traps and tracking animals with a skill that amazed Hannah. His movements were always deliberate, his attention unwavering, as if the world existed in those moments of stillness and focus. And though he said little, she found herself watching him more and more, trying to understand him the way he had understood her. She noticed the way he cared for her children, small things, like the way he always made sure Clara was warm before he turned his own work, or how he would teach Eli to carve wood when he thought no one was looking. And there were the moments when their eyes met across the fire, when something unspoken passed between them, something she didn't know how to name, something she didn't know if she was ready to acknowledge. But with every passing day, the weight of her grief began to lift, replaced by something gentler, something quieter. A peace she hadn't thought possible, not after the life she had lived, not after the loss that still haunted her. She didn't know if it was his presence, or the land itself, that had begun to heal her. Maybe it was both. But for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future that wasn't defined by loss. One evening, as the wind howled outside the shelter, Chayton spoke to her for the first time about the past. It was late, the fire crackling low in the pit between them, and Clara had already fallen asleep, her head resting against Eli's side. Eli, too, was nearly asleep, his fingers still wrapped around the carving he had been working on, a small figure of a bear, clumsy but endearing. "You have lost much," Chayton said, his voice low but steady, as though he had been carrying the weight of his own story for a long time. Hannah shifted uncomfortably but didn't look away from the fire. She had grown used to the silence between them, but there was something in his tone tonight that made her feel vulnerable, exposed. "I have," she said quietly, her throat tight. She hadn't spoken of her husband's death since the day it happened. The wound was still raw, still too fresh to touch. But Chayton had seen her grief, and in a way, he understood it without her needing to say a word. "Loss is a hard thing," he said. "I know." Hannah nodded, unsure how to respond, but the truth of his words resonated with her. She turned her gaze to him, meeting his eyes for the first time in a long while. There was a depth to his gaze, an understanding that came from experience, from a life lived in the shadows of loss and survival. "I thought I would never find peace again," she said softly. I thought the pain would never stop." Chayton was quiet for a long time, his eyes never leaving hers. Then, slowly, he reached out, his hand brushing the back of hers, a small, simple gesture, but one that made her heart race. It was the first time he had touched her in such a way, and it felt like the world shifted in that moment, just slightly, but enough to leave her breathless. "You will," he said, his voice gentle, "in time, but you must trust yourself, and you must trust others too." She swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling in her chest. Trust. She had spent so long building walls around herself, locking everyone out, convinced that to trust was to be vulnerable, to be hurt again. But here, in this quiet corner of the world, with this man who had no reason to protect her, she felt something stir, something raw and real. "I don't know if I can trust again," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." Chayton's fingers lingered on hers for a moment longer, then he slowly withdrew his hand, as though sensing her hesitation. "You are," he said simply, the conviction in his words undeniable. "Strength comes in many forms. It's not always about fighting or surviving. It's about letting go. It's about opening your heart again, even when it feels like it will break." Hannah closed her eyes, his words washing over her like a quiet tide. For so long, she had held on to her grief, her anger, her fear, thinking they were the only things that would keep her safe. But Chayton was right. Strength wasn't just about holding on. It was about knowing when to let go, when to trust again. The fire flickered between them, the heat warm against her skin, but it was the warmth between them that she felt most acutely. She had been so afraid of the world, so afraid of what could happen if she let herself be vulnerable. But now, with Chayton beside her, with her children nestled safely under the furs, she realized that maybe she had been wrong. Maybe there was more to life than fear. Maybe there was room for hope. As the night wore on, she found herself leaning closer to him, drawn by the quiet strength that emanated from him, by the soft, unspoken promise in his gaze. And when he looked at her, really looked at her, there was no pity in his eyes, only understanding, only acceptance. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, Hannah found herself growing stronger. She learned to trust Chayton in ways she never thought possible. She watched him care for her children with a tenderness she hadn't expected, and in return, she found herself opening up to him, piece by piece. The wall she had built around her heart slowly began to crumble, not all at once, but in quiet, hesitant steps. One afternoon, as Chayton returned from a hunting trip, the sky heavy with the promise of another storm, Hannah was waiting for him by the fire. She had a question that had been sitting in her heart for days, and now, with the world quiet around them, it felt like the right moment. "You said I would find peace," she began, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "But what about you? What have you lost?" Chayton paused for a moment, looking at her with a gaze that seemed to reach deep inside her. His expression softened, and for the first time, he shared a piece of his past with her, of the tribe he had lost, of the family taken from him by the ravages of war and time. "I lost them," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of years. But I am not lost. Not anymore. Hannah's heart ached for him, for the quiet sorrow in his words. In that moment, she understood something profound. There was no end to loss, no finality to the pain. But there was redemption in moving forward. There was hope in the strength to rebuild, to love again. As the storm rolled in, they sat by the fire, the warmth of the flames and the warmth of each other's presence filling the silence between them. For the first time in a long while, Hannah allowed herself to believe in a future that could be different from the past, a future that might hold more than just survival. In Chayton's quiet strength, in his unwavering patience, she found something she had not thought possible, a chance at redemption. And with it, the cold night air burned Eleanor Harper's lungs as she forced her horse forward, the frantic drumming of hooves swallowed by the wind howling through the pines. Her wedding gown, torn and muddied, flapped against her legs, its pristine lace now a cruel mockery of the life she had barely escaped. Her fingers trembled around the reins, white-knuckled, her breath ragged from exhaustion and fear. Behind her, the hunters came. She heard them before she saw them. Men crashing through the underbrush, shouts cutting through the night, the metallic clatter of rifles shifting in their scabbards. They were relentless, moving with the practiced precision of men who had tracked and killed before. And at the head of them all, her fiancé, Sheriff Thomas Calloway. Ellie had never truly feared him until 3 nights ago, when she overheard him laughing with his deputies, speaking of her as if she were nothing more than a prize to be claimed, her father's wealth the only thing of interest to him. And when he had admitted, in that cold, calculating tone, that her father's sudden illness was no accident, that his slow, withering body was the result of something Calloway had orchestrated, she had known she had only one choice. Flee or die. The stallion beneath her was tiring, its breath a rhythmic heave, its muscles quivering with the effort to keep running. She urged it on, her eyes scanning the dense wilderness for a path forward. The full moon cast jagged shadows between the trees, their spindly branches clawing at her like skeletal hands. A rifle cracked. The sharp bark of a bullet splintering a tree just inches from her head sent her heart slamming into her ribs. She ducked low over the horse's neck, pressing herself flat as another shot rang out. The stallion screamed, stumbling, its hooves sliding on the damp forest floor, and for one horrifying moment, Ellie thought they were going down. She yanked the reins, urging the animal to recover, to push forward. The river. She saw it just ahead, silver and fast-moving beneath the moonlight, its roar barely audible over the chaos behind her. It was deep, treacherous, swollen from the recent rains, but it was her only chance. If she could make it across, she might have a lead. If she hesitated, she would be caught. A sharp whistle cut through the air. Calloway's signal. She risked a glance back. The men were close now, faces shadowed but unmistakably determined. Calloway rode in the center, his dark coat billowing behind him, his hat low over his eyes. He didn't look frantic or rushed. He was toying with her. Ellie gritted her teeth. Not tonight. Digging her heels into the stallion's sides, she urged him toward the river's edge. The horse hesitated for only a fraction of a second before launching itself into the icy current. The shock of the water was immediate, biting through the thin layers of her dress, stealing the breath from her lungs. The current yanked at them both, dragging them downstream as the stallion fought to keep afloat. Ellie clung to its neck, fingers numb, teeth chattering. The shouts behind her grew distant. She kicked, urging the horse to keep moving. The other shore was close, but each second felt endless, the weight of the water pressing against her, pulling, threatening to drag her under. Then, suddenly, the stallion's hooves scraped against the rocky riverbed, and with one final heave, they stumbled onto the opposite bank. Ellie gasped, coughing up water as she slid from the saddle, collapsing onto the damp earth. She could hear the men still on the other side, their voices a mixture of frustration and curses. They wouldn't risk the river in the dark. Not yet, but they wouldn't stop. A moment later, a voice carried across the water, smooth and edged with amusement. "You put up a fight, Ellie. I'll give you that. Her blood ran cold. She turned her head just enough to see Calloway sitting calmly on his horse, his rifle resting lazily against his shoulder. Even from this distance, she could see the smirk playing on his lips. "You know this doesn't end here," he called. "I'll come for you. I always get what I want." Ellie forced herself upright, her body aching, her breath uneven. "Not this time," she whispered, though whether she meant it for herself or for him, she wasn't sure. She grabbed the reins, dragging the trembling stallion forward. She had no time to waste. Every second was another chance for them to find a way across, to close the distance between them. The forest ahead was thick, the shadows stretching deep into the unknown. But that was what she needed, the unknown. She walked forward, step by step, until the trees swallowed her whole. The forest was quieter here. The rush of the river had faded into a distant murmur, and only the whisper of wind through the pines and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures broke the silence. Eleanor Harper moved forward with stiff, aching limbs, every step a battle against exhaustion. Her dress, soaked and heavy, clung to her skin like a second burden. The stallion, exhausted and shivering, followed her lead with sluggish steps, its ears flicking at unseen noises. She had no sense of direction, no plan beyond putting as much distance as possible between herself and the men who hunted her. The terrain was foreign, shifting between thick underbrush and jagged outcroppings of rock, forcing her to navigate carefully. Every shadow felt like a threat. She pressed forward anyway. Time became indistinct. She moved on instinct alone, her body aching, her mind fractured between exhaustion and the gnawing fear of pursuit. She had no way of knowing how long she had walked before her knees finally buckled. The stallion stopped beside her, lowering its head as if in silent solidarity. Ellie pressed her forehead against the damp earth, trying to catch her breath, her pulse hammering in her ears. The crack of a branch snapped her back to full awareness. Her fingers curled around the hilt of the knife she had hidden beneath the folds of her ruined dress. Slowly, she turned her head. The forest seemed unchanged, dark, dense, motionless. And yet something had shifted, a weight in the air, a presence. She tightened her grip on the blade, forcing herself to remain still. If Calloway had sent one of his men ahead, she needed to be ready. Then, out of the darkness, a figure stepped forward. He moved like a shadow, silent and deliberate, his presence materializing from the trees as if he had always been there. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his features sharp but unreadable. His long black hair was tied back, and his clothing, buckskin and beads, worn but carefully kept, spoke of a man who belonged to this land in a way she never could. A quiver of arrows rested against his back, a knife at his hip, and though he held no weapon in his hand, Ellie knew that it wouldn't matter. If he wanted her dead, she wouldn't stand a chance. She forced herself upright, ignoring the sharp protest of her muscles. The stallion shifted beside her, nostrils flaring. She kept her eyes locked on the man before her, fingers still tight around the knife. He did not move closer. His dark eyes regarded her with quiet assessment, flicking briefly to her trembling horse, then back to her. Ellie's throat was dry. Her pulse pounded against her ribs. He had not spoken, had made no sign of hostility, but there was an intensity in his silence that unsettled her. She lifted her chin. "Who are you?" Her voice was hoarse, rasping from exhaustion. For a long moment, he did not answer. Then, in a voice as steady as the earth beneath them, he spoke. "Kengtawiaka." His words were firm, deliberate. Lakota. She had heard the language before, in whispers from traders and settlers who spoke of the tribes that roamed these lands. Some spoke with respect, others with fear. She had never known which to believe. She swallowed. I don't want trouble." His gaze did not waver. "You bring trouble with you." The words sent a shiver down her spine. He was right. She had led Calloway's men into land that was not hers to trespass. And if they found her here, they would bring destruction with them. She forced herself to stand taller, though the weight of exhaustion made her limbs feel like lead. "I'm running. I have no place to go." He studied her for a long moment. She wondered what he saw. A woman who was nothing but weakness? A burden? He could leave her here, let the wilderness take care of her. It would be easy. Instead, he shifted his stance slightly, tilting his head toward the forest. You will not live through the night alone. Ellie hesitated. Was it a warning? An offer? She didn't know. What she did know was that she was too exhausted to keep going, too desperate to refuse. She took a slow breath. And if I come with you? He didn't answer immediately. Then, you do not belong here. The words stung more than she expected, but she pushed past it. Neither do the men chasing me. At that, something flickered in his expression. A quiet understanding. He exhaled, his shoulders settling in decision. Come. Ellie did not ask where they were going. It didn't matter. She followed. The journey was silent. Kingta moved with an ease that made her feel clumsy by comparison, his steps quiet, sure. He glanced back only once, checking to see if she was keeping up. She did, though it took every last reserve of strength she had. The forest seemed to close in around them, the moonlight breaking through in fractured beams. At some point, the weight of exhaustion became too much. Her legs faltered, her vision blurred, and she felt herself swaying. Then warmth. Kingta had caught her before she could collapse, his grip firm but careful. Ellie blinked up at him, dazed, her body too spent to protest. You cannot walk farther, he said. She wanted to argue, but the truth was undeniable. The night's ordeal had taken everything from her. Her eyes drifted shut for a moment. Just a moment. When she opened them again, they were no longer in the deep forest. They had reached a clearing. A low fire crackled, its light flickering against the towering pines. A horse stood tethered nearby, and beyond it, a small, makeshift shelter. He had brought her to a campsite. Ellie sank down beside the fire as Kingta pulled a fur-lined blanket from his pack, tossing it toward her. She caught it clumsily, hands shaking from the cold. He did not speak, nor did he ask questions. He simply crouched nearby, tending to the flames with the quiet efficiency of a man who had done so 1,000 times before. The warmth seeped into her bones, and with it, the first shreds of something she had not allowed herself to feel since the night began. Safety. She wrapped the blanket around herself, watching Kingta through half-lidded eyes. His face was unreadable, his focus elsewhere, but he had chosen not to leave her to the wilderness. That was something. The fire crackled between them, the only sound in the stillness. You should sleep, he said, his voice quieter now. Ellie hesitated, but the weight of exhaustion was unbearable. She let her body relax, sinking into the furs beneath her. As sleep pulled at her, she thought of Calloway, of his promise. I'll come for you. The words echoed in her mind, a reminder that this wasn't over. But for tonight, she had survived. Ellie woke to the scent of smoke and pine, the warmth of the fire a stark contrast to the damp chill that had settled in her bones overnight. For a moment, disoriented, she thought she was back home, waking in her father's grand estate, wrapped in fine linens. But then she shifted, and the rough texture of a fur-lined blanket met her fingertips, the aching stiffness in her limbs reminding her of everything she had endured. The river, the chase, the stranger who had saved her. Kingta sat a short distance away, sharpening a blade with slow, deliberate movements. The early morning light filtered through the trees, casting shifting patterns across his face. He hadn't spoken since last night, and she had no idea what he intended to do with her. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence. She pulled the blanket closer around her shoulders. Where are we? Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. Kingta didn't look up, far enough from where they were. Ellie exhaled, running a hand through her tangled hair. It wasn't enough. Calloway wouldn't stop hunting her just because the river had slowed him down. She knew his kind. He was a man who took what he wanted, and he wanted her, whether for possession, revenge, or the simple satisfaction of proving that she could never escape him. She forced herself to her feet, unsteady but determined. I can't stay here. Kingta's gaze flicked toward her, unreadable. No. She hesitated, thrown off by the agreement. Then I should go. His sharpening stopped. He turned the blade over in his hands before finally looking at her, his dark eyes assessing. Where? The question sent a shiver through her. There was no answer. She had no home to return to, no safe haven waiting beyond the trees. She had spent so long thinking only of escape that she had never considered what would come next. "I don't know," she admitted. Kingta nodded as if that answer was expected. He set the blade down and stood. Even at rest, he carried himself with an effortless command, a presence that unsettled her as much as it reassured her. "I will take you to my people." Ellie's lips parted in surprise. "Why?" His expression didn't change. "You will not live otherwise." It wasn't kindness, she realized. It was practicality. And yet, something in his tone, something measured, certain, made her feel as though this was not a decision he made lightly. She considered refusing. The thought of walking into a Lakota village, of stepping into a world where she did not belong, made her uneasy. She had heard the stories, whispers among settlers of warriors who took captives, who punished trespassers. But she had also heard worse stories about the white men who had broken every promise ever made to the tribes of the plains. And the only alternative was facing Calloway alone. She took a breath and nodded. "All right." Kingta said nothing, only turned and motioned for her to follow. The journey was grueling. Her body still ached from the night before, and the thick underbrush tugged at her ruined dress, making every step a battle. Kingta moved ahead of her, silent and sure-footed, pausing only occasionally to glance back. He didn't offer her help. He didn't slow his pace. He simply expected her to keep up. She resented it at first. Every step was agony, every breath an effort. But something in his unspoken challenge pushed her forward. He did not see her as a fragile woman in need of saving. He saw her as someone who had to survive on her own strength. And she would. By midday, they reached the edge of a wide plateau. Below them, nestled against a winding river, was the Lakota camp. Ellie's breath caught. It was nothing like she had imagined. Tents rose in careful clusters, their painted surfaces blending with the land. Smoke curled from small fires, the scent of roasting meat carried on the wind. Children ran between the tents, their laughter mixing with the distant sounds of horses and the rhythmic pounding of drums. A home, built not of walls and possessions, but of people. Ellie swallowed hard, suddenly hyper-aware of her appearance. She was a mess. Her dress was little more than rags, her skin scratched and bruised, her hair a tangled disaster. She had spent her entire life caring about how she was seen, about the image she projected. Here, she was nothing, a stranger, a trespasser. Kingta didn't give her time to hesitate. He started down the slope, and Ellie had no choice but to follow. The moment they stepped into the camp, all movement ceased. Dozens of eyes turned toward them, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright suspicion. Ellie's fingers tightened around the edges of her tattered dress, resisting the urge to shrink back. A woman stepped forward, older, with streaks of gray in her long hair, her face lined with wisdom rather than age. She studied Ellie with sharp eyes before turning to Kingta. A rapid exchange of Lakota words passed between them. Ellie caught nothing but his name, Kingta. The woman's gaze flicked back to Ellie, and though she did not smile, something softened in her features. She nodded once before motioning to another young woman nearby. The girl, barely past adolescence, stepped forward hesitantly. She had dark eyes, round and warm with curiosity. She pointed at Ellie's dress and then at herself, speaking quickly in Lakota. Ellie blinked. "I what?" "She will bring you new clothes," Kingta said. "Yours are finished." Ellie bristled at the bluntness, but she couldn't argue. The girl, Takala, she soon learned, led her toward one of the tents, pressing a folded dress into her hands before retreating with a shy smile. Inside the tent, Ellie let out a slow breath. The fabric was soft beneath her fingers, the stitching careful and precise. It was simple but beautiful. She changed. When she emerged, the weight of eyes on her returned, but something was different now. The stares weren't just suspicion, they were assessment. They were waiting to see what kind of woman she was. She met Kingta's gaze across the camp. He gave no indication of approval or disapproval, only nodded once before turning away. It was clear then. She was not a guest. She was not a prisoner. She would have to prove herself. The first test came sooner than she expected. That night, as she sat near the fire, listening to the steady hum of conversation around her, a distant cry cut through the air. A scout returning. Kinkta was on his feet instantly. Ellie followed his movement, heart pounding. The scout spoke rapidly, and though she didn't understand the words, the urgency in his tone was unmistakable. Kinkta turned to her, his expression hard. Calloway's men are near. The words sent a jolt through her, but she forced herself to stay still. They're coming, she asked. Not yet. They search, but they will find us. The camp erupted into action. Warriors gathered weapons. Men and women moved swiftly to secure supplies. It was a practiced efficiency. This was not the first time they had prepared for danger. Ellie felt Kinkta's gaze on her. She met it without flinching. You brought this to them, he said, not unkindly, but with an edge of truth she couldn't deny. Her hands clenched into fists. Then let me help. For the first time since they had met, Kinkta hesitated. He studied her, weighing something she couldn't see. Then, finally, he nodded. The battle would come, and this time she wouldn't run. The night was thick with silence, the kind that pressed against the ribs and coiled around the throat. Every breath Ellie took was slow, deliberate, steadying herself for what was to come. The Lakota camp had transformed in the wake of the warning. Fires burned lower, horses were secured, and warriors moved with a quiet urgency that sent a shiver through her. They had done this before. They knew what it meant to defend their home. Kinkta stood near the outer perimeter, speaking in low tones with the others, his presence as still and assured as the mountains themselves. Ellie watched him, her fingers tightening around the hilt of the knife she had been given. She had expected fear. Instead, she found something else burning beneath her ribs, resolve. When Kinkta turned to her, his dark eyes met hers, searching. If they come, you stay back. Ellie lifted her chin. No. A flicker of something passed across his face. Not anger, not even surprise, just quiet acknowledgement. He didn't argue. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice lowering so only she could hear. They will not fight like us. They will bring numbers, but they do not know the land. His gaze flicked toward the shadows, stretching between the trees. We do. Ellie swallowed, nodding. The truth of it settled deep in her bones. Calloway would come because he believed himself invincible, because men like him saw the world as theirs to take. He had never been told no, never lost a fight he hadn't rigged, but he didn't understand the people he was coming for. The hours stretched, tension threading through the air. Then, at the edge of the darkness, the first movement. A rider. Ellie's breath stilled as the figure emerged, silhouetted against the moonlight. The gleam of a badge caught the faint glow, the unmistakable outline of a rifle strapped across his back. Then another rider appeared. Then another. Calloway had come. He didn't speak at first, just sat there astride his horse, studying the camp like a man inspecting a piece of land he was about to claim. Then slowly he smiled. You gave us quite the chase, Eleanor, he said, his voice carrying across the open space between them. I was starting to think you didn't want to marry me. Ellie forced herself to stand her ground. I'd rather die. Calloway chuckled, shaking his head. Now, that's not necessary. His gaze flicked past her, to Kinkta, to the warriors gathered in the dim light. This isn't your fight, he said smoothly. Hand her over, and we'll be on our way. No one moved. Kinkta remained still, his expression unreadable, but there was a quiet fire behind his eyes. He was not a man who spoke to fill silence. When he did speak, his words mattered. You bring war to our land, he said finally. For what? Calloway laughed. Not war, just business. His voice hardened, sharp as a blade. The woman belongs to me. Ellie felt something snap inside her. She took a step forward before she could think better of it. I was never yours. Calloway's face darkened. That's not for you to decide. Kinkta moved then. Only a fraction, but it was enough. A shift in weight, a silent warning, a wolf bracing to strike. The men behind Calloway stirred, uneasy. The balance was precarious, a moment suspended between breath and violence. Then Calloway reached for his rifle. The night shattered. Gunfire split the air, the first shot wild, striking the dirt just inches from Kingta's feet. Chaos erupted in an instant. Lakota warriors sprang into motion, bows raised, knives drawn. The men on horseback fired as they charged, bullets cutting through the night, splintering wood, sending up clouds of dust. Ellie ducked low, heart hammering. She had no time to think. She moved on instinct, grabbing the small pistol Kingta had pressed in her hand earlier. She wasn't a fighter, but she could survive. She aimed. One of Calloway's men had dismounted, rushing toward the camp with a blade gleaming in his hand. Ellie fired. The recoil slammed through her, but the shot was true. The man staggered, falling to his knees. She didn't have time to process it. Another gunshot cracked, and she whirled in time to see Kingta lunging, moving like the wind, closing the distance between him and Calloway in seconds. The sheriff barely had time to react before Kingta's knife slashed across his arm, forcing him to drop his rifle. Calloway snarled, swinging wildly. He was strong, but strength meant little when the other man was faster. Kingta ducked the blow, driving a fist into Calloway's ribs, then another. The sheriff stumbled, but he wasn't finished. He yanked a revolver from his holster. Ellie didn't think. She moved. She threw herself at him, slamming into his side just as he pulled the trigger. The bullet went wide, disappearing into the night. Calloway cursed, grabbing her by the wrist, his grip like iron. "You stupid," his words cut off as Kingta was there again, his knife flashing. The blade found its mark. Calloway staggered back, his eyes wide, his hand pressing to his side where blood seeped dark against his coat. The camp was still now. The battle had ended in seconds. The men who had come with Calloway were either dead or fleeing, disappearing into the trees. Calloway wavered, his breath ragged. He turned his gaze to Ellie, something like disbelief flickering in his expression. He exhaled a wet, rattling sound. "You think this changes anything?" Ellie stepped forward, meeting his gaze without fear. "I know it does." Calloway's lips curled into something almost like a smile. Then, slowly, he crumpled. Silence. Ellie exhaled, her body trembling, the weight of everything crashing down on her at once. She felt Kingta's presence beside her, steady, solid. It was over. The warriors gathered the fallen, tending to wounds, checking for survivors. Ellie felt the tension bleed from her limbs as she watched, the reality settling over her like a tide. She was free. She turned to Kingta. There were no words. There didn't need to be. He had given her a chance when no one else would. He had fought beside her, not for her. And in that, something had shifted between them. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "You are not the same woman who came here." Ellie swallowed. "No." A beat of silence. Then softer, "Will you stay?" The question sent a ripple through her. She had spent so much of her life running, never belonging, never feeling truly seen. Here, in this place, with these people, she had found something she hadn't realized she was searching for. She took a breath. Yes. For the first time, Kingta smiled. The night stretched on, the fire burning low. The world was different now, shaped by the choices made beneath the open sky. And for the first time, Ellie knew exactly where she belonged. The trading post reeked of sweat, stale whiskey, and the acrid burn of a half-dead fire. Ella Morgan tightened her grip on the rifle slung over her shoulder as she stepped inside. The wooden floor groaned beneath her boots, and the noise inside barely faltered. Rough voices trading rumors, tin mugs clinking, the occasional scrape of a chair against the floor. She ignored the eyes that turned her way. Men who had seen too many miles, too many fights. Ella wasn't the first young woman to pass through these parts alone, but she knew well enough what they thought when they saw her. A stray, something to be claimed or cast aside. Old Walter stood behind the counter, his weathered face breaking into something like a smile when he spotted her. He had been her guardian, if he could be called that, ever since her family had been slaughtered by outlaws 5 years ago. A fur trader, a drifter, but the only person left in the world she trusted. "About time you got back," Walter grumbled. pushing a small burlap sack toward her. That should last you a week. More if you don't go wasting it. Ella exhaled, nodding as she took the provisions. I got the pelts, she murmured, slipping a bundle onto the counter. She'd trapped them herself, skinned them with numb fingers under the biting wind of the prairie. Walter grunted his approval. Good work. A sudden hush rippled through the room. The door swung open behind her. Ella didn't need to turn and no trouble had walked in. The air shifted. A chair scraped back. Boots thudded against the floor. The conversation, once easy and careless, became something else, tight, waiting. Walter. The voice was low, rough, soaked in whiskey and dust. Ella turned her head slightly, just enough to see the man who had spoken. His eyes were cold, his beard patchy, his belt heavy with a pistol and a hunting knife. She recognized him. Clayton Tate, leader of the gang that had torn through these lands, leaving nothing but ruin in their wake. Walter didn't flinch. What do you want, Clayton? Tate grinned, showing yellowed teeth. Heard you've been holding on to something that don't belong to you. His gaze flicked to Ella. The tension in the room turned suffocating. Walter shifted, placing a hand on the counter between them. You ain't got no business with the girl. Clayton chuckled, glancing at his men, 3 of them, all armed. That's so. His fingers toyed with the handle of his gun. See, I heard otherwise. Heard she's got herself a debt to settle. Family owed me, and when they couldn't pay, well, seems to me the debt don't just disappear. Ella's pulse roared in her ears. Walter's voice turned hard as iron. You're not talking her. Clayton's smile vanished. The room froze. And then the gunshot. Walter staggered, a bloom of red spreading across his chest. His body struck the floorboards with a sickening thud. Ella couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The world narrowed to the pistol in Clayton's hand, still smoking, and the growing pool of blood beneath the only man who had ever given a damn about her. Someone shouted. The outlaws surged forward. Ella didn't wait. Her body moved before her mind caught up, shoving past the nearest man and diving for the door. A hand snatched at her arm. She swung the rifle hard, cracking the stock against bone. A curse, the grip loosening. She tore free. The cold night air slapped her as she burst outside. Her breath came fast, her heartbeat pounding like war drums. The outlaws weren't far behind. A horse. She needed a horse. Her eyes darted wildly. The nearest one, half-saddled, stamped its hooves near the hitching post. She lunged, scrambling onto its back. Hands fumbled for the reins. Shouts behind her. A second shot rang out, with splintered inches from her leg. She dug her heels into the horse's sides. It bolted, hooves striking the dirt in a frenzy of motion. The trading post disappeared behind her, swallowed by the night. The wind cut against her skin, her fingers stiffening as she clutched the reins. The terrain stretched out ahead. Rolling hills, scattered trees, the faint glimmer of a river in the distance. Nowhere to hide. Walter was dead. The realization hit like a kick to the ribs. Her breath hitched, but she shoved the grief down. Survival first. Grieve later. The sky stretched endless above her, stars burning cold and distant. Every shadow felt like a threat. She rode until the horse slowed, breath heaving, sides lathered in sweat. The river wasn't far now. Dismounting, she led the horse forward, her legs trembling. The water shimmered, black as ink, reflecting the night sky. She knelt at the edge, scooping a handful into her mouth. It was freezing, burning down her throat, but she didn't care. A rustle, a branch snapping. Ella's hand flew to her rifle. She wasn't alone. The movement came from the trees beyond the riverbank. Slow, deliberate. Not an animal. A man. Her heart pounded. She leveled the rifle, aiming into the darkness. Show yourself. Silence. Then a figure emerged. Tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a dark cloak. His face, partially lit by the moon, was striking. High cheekbones, sharp eyes. The braids in his dark hair and the markings on his skin told her what he was before he even spoke. Cheyenne. Akachita. His gaze flickered to the rifle pointed at him, but he didn't move. He looked her over, assessing, calculating. You shouldn't be here. His voice was low, edged with quiet authority. Ella swallowed, her grip tightening. Neither should you. He was wounded. She saw it now. A dark stain spreading across his side, barely visible against his clothing. He was hiding, just like her. A standoff, neither willing to trust the other. Then, voices carried in the distance. The outlaws. Searching. Akachita's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, slow, deliberate. They hunt you. Ella exhaled, her muscles locking with tension. She nodded. A flicker of something crossed his face, understanding, maybe. He glanced toward the sound, then back at her. You want to live? He asked. Ella hesitated. This man was dangerous, but so was the world behind her. Her answer came in the way she lowered the rifle. Akachita turned without another word, stepping back into the shadows. Ella followed. The wilderness swallowed them whole, a vast and merciless expanse stretching in every direction. The moonlight barely reached through the thick canopy as Ella followed Akachita, each step cautious, every breath measured. The night held its own dangers, but nothing compared to the men hunting them. The outlaws would not give up. She knew that much. Akachita moved like a shadow, silent and sure-footed, as if the earth itself welcomed him. Ella struggled to match his pace, her boots snapping twigs and crunching dried leaves. He glanced back once, his sharp gaze cutting through the darkness, wordlessly telling her to be quieter. Frustration burned in her, but she swallowed it. He was keeping her alive. For now, the scent of damp earth and pine filled the air. The river roared somewhere in the distance, an unrelenting force cutting through the land. They needed to cross it before the outlaws caught up. The thought sent a chill through her bones. Akachita came to an abrupt stop, lifting a hand. Ella froze. The silence pressed in around them. Then she heard it too, the snap of a branch, distant voices. The outlaws were near. Her pulse thundered. She turned her head slowly, scanning the darkness. They couldn't run. Not yet. Any movement would give them away. Akachita crouched low, his fingers curling around the hilt of his knife. Ella tightened her grip on her rifle, the cold metal biting into her palm. A figure passed between the trees, little more than a dark silhouette against the dim moonlight. Another followed, for maybe 5 of them, moving with the careless confidence of men who believed they had already won. Akachita motioned for her to stay low as he eased backward, guiding them deeper into the undergrowth. They moved inch by inch, silent, deliberate. A single mistake would mean death. A loud curse rang out behind them. One of the outlaws had tripped over something in the dark. Laughter followed, rough and mocking. Ella dared to glance back. The men weren't worried. They weren't rushing. They thought she and Akachita had nowhere to go. They were entirely wrong. When the sounds faded, Akachita rose and motioned for her to follow. The river was close now, its distant rush turning into a deafening roar. The water would erase their tracks, but crossing it would be another battle. Ella's breath hitched when she saw the current. Fast, churning, merciless. The moon's reflection wavered across the surface, a deceptive illusion of calm. One wrong step, and the river would take her just as surely as any bullet. Akachita studied it for only a moment before stepping in. The water swallowed his legs instantly. He turned, holding out a hand. She hesitated. His dark eyes locked onto hers. Move. Ella inhaled sharply and followed. The cold punched through her body like a knife. She gasped, the air stolen from her lungs as the water surged around her waist, threatening to drag her down. The current pulled at her, testing her balance. Akachita didn't falter, guiding her with steady determination. Halfway across, she lost her footing. The river seized her. Panic exploded in her chest as she was yanked under, the world turning black and furious. She fought, kicking, clawing, but the current was relentless. Then hands, strong, unyielding, grasped her arm. Akachita, with a sharp pull, he wrenched her upward, back into the icy air. She coughed, gasping for breath, her body trembling. His grip tightened. Hold on. His voice was steady, a stark contrast to the chaos around them. She clung to his arm as they fought the last few steps, finally reaching the opposite bank. She collapsed on a solid ground, shivering, her fingers digging into the dirt as if afraid the river would reclaim her. Akecheta crouched beside her, his breathing only slightly heavier than before. She turned her head toward him. "You saved me." The words felt foreign on her tongue. His expression was unreadable. "You would have done the same." She wasn't sure she believed that. Not yet. They couldn't stay. The outlaws would reach the river soon, and if they saw footprints leading into the water, they'd know exactly what had happened. With stiff limbs, Ella forced herself up and followed Akecheta into the darkness once more. The night passed in restless silence. When dawn finally broke, it brought no warmth. The world was painted in dull grays, the sky thick with clouds. Somewhere far behind them, the outlaws still searched, their presence a weight on Ella's chest that refused to lift. They found a temporary shelter beneath the exposed roots of an ancient tree, its gnarled limbs stretching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. Akecheta crouched beside a small fire, his movements precise as he cleaned a shallow wound on his side. Ella sat a few feet away, her back against the rough bark. Exhaustion gnawed at her, but sleep refused to come. She watched Akecheta carefully. He had barely spoken since the river. She knew next to nothing about him, only that he fought like a man who had nothing left to lose. Finally, she broke the silence. "Why are they hunting you?" His hands stilled. He didn't look up. "They burn my village, kill my people." The words were spoken without emotion, but Ella heard what lay beneath them. She knew loss when she saw it. Something twisted inside her. A painful recognition. "I'm sorry." Akecheta glanced at her then, his dark eyes sharp, searching. "And you?" She looked away. The answer sat heavy on her tongue. "They kill my family." For a moment, neither spoke. Then, Akecheta nodded, as if some silent understanding had been reached. The fire crackled between them, filling the space where words had failed. They ate what little they had, dried meat and stale bread. It wasn't enough, but it would have to be. By midday, the sky darkened. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a low growl of warning. A storm was coming. They moved quickly, knowing the rain would wash away any remaining tracks. But it would also slow them down. The ground turned soft beneath their feet, sucking at their boots. The wind carried the scent of wet earth, thick and cloying. As they climbed a steep ridge, Akecheta stopped suddenly. Ella nearly ran into him. "What?" He lifted a hand, silencing her. Then she heard it, a low growl, deep, menacing. The air went still. Ella turned her head slowly, every muscle in her body locking into place. Not far from them, just beyond the trees, stood a mountain lion. Its golden eyes burned with hunger, its muscles coiled, ready to spring. Ella tightened her grip on her rifle. Akecheta didn't reach for his weapon. Instead, he held out his arms slightly, making himself appear larger. The mountain lion watched them, tail flicking. A silent challenge. Ella's heart pounded. If she fired, the sound would carry. The outlaws would hear. But if she didn't, the beast took a step forward. Akecheta moved first. With slow, deliberate steps, he shifted his weight, his gaze never leaving the animals. The tension thickened, the air suffocating. Then, without warning, he let out a sharp, guttural shout. The sound startled the mountain lion, its ears flattening. It hesitated. Akecheta took another step. Another. The beast growled but didn't attack. Its tail twitched, and then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it turned and slinked back into the trees. Ella exhaled sharply, her hands shaking. Akecheta glanced at her. "Always face them. Never run." She swallowed hard. "I'll try to remember that." The moment passed, but the tension remained. They had survived the river, the wild, the beast, but the true danger still waited for them in the distance. And it was closing in. The air felt different now. Thicker, weighted with something unseen yet undeniable. The outlaws were closing in. Ella could feel it in her bones, in the way Akecheta's eyes flicked to the horizon with increasing frequency. Their brief moments of rest had become shorter, their movements more deliberate. There was no more time for hesitation. The chase was reaching its end. The morning was pale and gray when they spotted the cabin. It stood crooked against the backdrop of a dying forest, its roof sagging, the door hanging slightly ajar. The scent of rain still lingered in the air, clinging to the damp wood and the cold earth beneath their boots. Ella hesitated. Any shelter could be a trap. Akecheta studied it in silence before nodding once. "We look inside." He moved first, his steps light, measured. Ella followed, rifle in hand, her pulse steady but alert. She had learned to move like him now, to listen to the silence between each sound, to read the language of the wild as he did. The cabin was empty. Dust floated in the slanted light that filtered through the broken shutters. A table stood in the center of the room, one chair missing a leg, its twin lying abandoned in the corner. A faded quilt remained on the cot, its edges frayed. Someone had lived here once. Ella ran a hand over the rough wood of the table, her fingers tracing old knife marks. This place had been a home. Now, it was nothing more than a relic of a life long gone. Akecheta crouched near the fireplace, running his fingers through the ash. Cold. No one here for days. Relief mixed with unease. They could rest, but not for long. She leaned her rifle against the table and lowered herself onto the cot. Her body ached, her limbs heavy from days of running. Akecheta remained by the door, his back straight, his gaze sharp. Even now, he refused to let his guard down. "You should sleep," she murmured. He shook his head. "Not yet." Silence stretched between them. It wasn't uncomfortable anymore. The distance that had once separated them had lessened. They still carried their own burdens, their own grief, but something unspoken had begun to settle between them. An understanding. A gust of wind rattled the shutters. Ella closed her eyes for only a moment. Then, a creak. Not from the wind. She tensed, her hand reaching instinctively for the rifle beside her. Akecheta had already moved, pressing himself against the wall near the door. His fingers curled around his knife, muscles taut. Another step, then the door swung open. The figure that stepped inside was not an outlaw. Not yet. He was older, his hair streaked with gray, his coat torn and mud-stained. A pistol hung at his hip, though he hadn't drawn it. His eyes flicked from Akecheta to Ella, calculating. "Well now," the man said, voice rough with years of hard living. "Ain't often I find company in a place like this." Ella stayed silent, her grip tightening on the rifle. Akecheta did not move. The man stepped further in, shaking off the rain. "I ain't looking for trouble." He glanced at Akecheta. "But something tells me you two already found it." A beat passed. Then Akecheta spoke. "Who are you?" The man's lips twisted in a humorless smile. "Name's Turner. Some call me a bounty hunter. Others call me worse." He exhaled, stepping closer. "And I've been tracking some real mean bastards through these parts." Ella's throat tightened. "The outlaws." Turner nodded. "They're not far. Maybe a day behind." His gaze lingered on her a moment longer. "And something tells me you already knew that." Akecheta remained still, his body a coil of restrained energy. "What do you want?" Turner let out a slow breath. "I want what you want. Those men dead." Ella studied him, searching for deception in the hard lines of his face. She found none, but that didn't mean she trusted him. "They're planning a raid," Turner continued, voice low. "Big one. Gonna burn what's left of a Cheyenne settlement up near the river." Akecheta's breath hitched. It was barely noticeable, but Ella saw it, felt the shift in the air. Turner leaned against the table, his hand resting near his pistol, but not on it. "We don't stop them now. There won't be nothing left." Akecheta's fists clenched at his sides. Ella could see it. The storm rising behind his calm exterior, the weight of unspoken grief pressing against him like a tide waiting to break. She took a step closer. "You know where they'll be?" Turner nodded. "I can take you to him." He paused. "But I ain't doing this for free." Ella's stomach turned. "Of course. What do you want?" His eyes darkened. "Clayton Tate. Alive." Akecheta stiffened. "No." Turner sighed. "Listen, kid, I know what he's done, but there's a price on his head, and I mean to collect it." Ella swallowed hard. The thought of Tate breathing after everything he had taken from him made her blood run cold. But Turner had something they didn't. Information. Akachita shook his head, his voice quiet but firm. He dies. Turner exhaled through his nose, considering. Then he nodded once. Fine, but I get his body. Ella looked between them. The deal had been made, silent and grim. Akachita turned to her. We leave now. They moved swiftly, following Turner's lead. The rain had begun again, a slow drizzle soaking through their clothes, turning the ground into thick mud. By nightfall, they reached the ridge overlooking the outlaw camp. Smoke curled into the sky from a dozen small fires. The men below were unaware, their laughter carrying through the valley. Ella's pulse quickened. This was it, the moment they had been running toward. Akachita crouched beside her, his gaze locked on the camp below. There was no hesitation in his eyes, only purpose. Turner drew his pistol, checking the chamber. We go at dawn. Ella swallowed against the knot in her throat. She had been running for so long. But now, there was nowhere left to run. Dawn would bring blood, one way or another. The first light of dawn crept over the ridge, casting the outlaw camp in hues of gray and gold. Smoke curled lazily from dying fires, the scent of burnt wood thick in the cold morning air. The men below were stirring, stretching from sleep, unaware that death was coming for them. Ella steadied her breath. The rifle felt heavier in her hands than it ever had before. This was different. This wasn't just survival. This was vengeance. Akachita knelt beside her, his face carved from stone. He had painted his skin with the earth, streaks of dark mud across his cheekbones, his arms. A warrior preparing for battle. There was no fear in his eyes, only resolve. Turner adjusted the sights on his pistol, muttering under his breath. We going fast, quiet as we can, but it won't stay quiet for long. Akachita's grip tightened around the knife at his waist. We don't leave any of them standing. Ella swallowed. The weight of those words settled deep in her chest. No hesitation, no mercy. A silent nod passed between them, and then they moved. The first outlaw never saw Akachita coming. One fluid motion, silent, precise, the blade slipped beneath his ribs before he could shout. His body crumpled into the dirt. Ella's hand shook, but she forced herself forward. There was no turning back now. Turner took down the next man with a quiet shot to the head, the muffled crack of his pistol lost in the morning stillness. Two down. Ella pressed against the side of a wagon, her breath shallow, heart pounding in her ears. A man stirred near the fire, rubbing his eyes, reaching for his rifle. She exhaled, aimed. The shot rang out, louder than she expected, echoing across the camp. The outlaw jerked backward, blood spraying across the embers. For a heartbeat, silence. Then, shouts. Chaos. The camp exploded into motion. Akachita was already moving, weaving between tents and bodies, his blade flashing. Turner fired, reloaded, fired again, cursing as men scrambled for their weapons. Ella pressed her back to the wagon, hands slick with sweat, breath coming fast and ragged. She had hit her mark, but there was no time to think about it. A shadow loomed. She spun, rifle raised, but the outlaw was faster. He slammed into her, knocking the weapon from her grasp. The ground hit hard, the wind driven from her lungs. His weight pinned her down, his breath hot and rancid against her skin. She fought, clawed at his face, reached blindly for anything. Her fingers closed around a rock. She swung, the sickening crunch of bone. The outlaw howled, rolling off her. She scrambled up, grabbed her rifle, and fired. He stopped moving. Her breaths came in sharp, uneven gulps. Akachita was fighting two men at once, his movements fluid, brutal. One fell, gurgling, clutching his throat. The other lunged. Ella raised her rifle, but Akachita didn't need her help. With a swift motion, he grabbed the man's wrist, twisted, drove his knife deep into the outlaw's gut. He shoved the body away and met her gaze across the camp. Blood streaked his arms, his chest rising and falling with exertion. He nodded once. She nodded back. More gunfire. Turner had taken cover behind a stack of barrels, picking off outlaws one by one. And then a voice rang out, louder than the gunfire, louder than the chaos. Enough. Clayton Tate. He stood at the far end of the camp, his pistol pressed against the temple of a terrified boy, one of the few survivors from Akachita's village. The battlefield froze. Ella's breath hitched. The child couldn't have been more than 10. His face was streaked with dirt, wide eyes darting between them. Tate's grip was firm, his mouth twisted into a mocking sneer. "Drop your weapons, or I put a hole in his skull." Akachita didn't move. Tate pressed the gun harder against the boy's head. "I mean it," Turner cursed under his breath. Ella's hands trembled around the rifle. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Akachita took a slow step forward. His voice was calm, too calm. "Let him go." Tate laughed. "Oh, I don't think so." His eyes flicked to Ella. "You've caused me a hell of a lot of trouble, girl. I should have put you down the moment I saw you." Her stomach churned. She hated the way he looked at her, the way his voice slithered through the air like a snake coiling around her throat. Akachita took another step. "You won't leave here alive." Tate's grin widened. "Maybe not, but neither will he." Ella saw it before anyone else did. The boy moved. His small hand darted toward Tate's belt, fingers closing around the handle of the knife there. Tate realized a second too late. The blade plunged into his side. He shouted, jerking back, his gun hand wavering for just a fraction of a second. Akachita was on him. A blur of motion, the crack of bones, the sharp, wet sound of steel meeting flesh. Tate gasped, his body stiffening. Akachita held him there, the knife buried deep in his chest, his face expressionless as he watched the life drain from the outlaw's eyes. Tate gurgled something incoherent, then sagged. Akachita let him fall. Silence. The boy stumbled back, his chest rising and falling in sharp bursts. Ella ran to him, dropping to her knees, gripping his arms. "You're all right," she whispered. "You're all right." His lip trembled, but he nodded. Akachita stood over Tate's body, unmoving. Turner exhaled, spinning his pistol before holstering it. "Well," he muttered, "that's that." Ella turned to Akachita. His shoulders were tight, his face unreadable. She reached for him without thinking, her fingers brushing against his wrist. He looked at her. For the first time, she saw past the warrior, past the vengeance. She saw the man, the one who had lost everything, the one who had fought for something more, the one who had saved her. The wind carried the scent of blood and ash, but it wasn't the stench of death that filled her lungs. It was something else, something like freedom. The battle was over, but the war was never truly done. Akachita lifted his head, staring out across the land. Ella followed his gaze. Somewhere beyond the hills, beyond the rivers, beyond the ghosts that still lingered in their shadows, there was something waiting for them. Not revenge, not survival, something more. She let out a slow breath. For the first time in years, she felt like she was finally moving toward it.